שלוש, שתיים, אחת, קדימה.
Welcome back to Sparking Creativity, the EthnoArts podcast. I'm your host, Justin, and today we have a very special guest with us. I am happy to introduce to you my friend Rachel. Rachel, would you like to say hi?
Hi, everyone, and hi, Justin. Thanks for having me on the podcast today.
It is a treat. Rachel and I go way back. We went and through trading together, we had classes together. We've been able to work together off and on over the years, and that's been super fun. And anything that you want to share about yourself, Rachel, so they can know you?
Yeah, I've been working in EthnoArts for the last 9 years. The last almost 5 of them in Eurasia. And yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Sounds good. Maybe you could share just about like what drew you to this work and what you liked about EthnoArts.
I really enjoy the relational aspect of EthnoArts. I've always had a love for the arts in general since I was a kid. And then when I found out that you can take the arts of a culture and use the communicational elements of it to help them with development, I thought that was really cool. And that's what continues to draw me to the work.
Awesome. So for me and my wife joining into this work, obviously we joined a faith-based organization, and so the Christian ministry application was something that was important for us and that drew us into it. And today we're gonna talk about the domain of literacy and education. So maybe not a direct Christian ministry application, but I think it's important for anyone working in development work, working in community development, working in education, working for non-government organizations. There's a lot of applications to EthnoArts. We talk about how arts are anything that communicates something and has meaning to a particular group of people. So no matter what your work is, we all find ourselves in a particular cultural context, and our areas of work are communicating something to people in these contexts. And so EthnoArts then is just a part of it and supports all of these different kinds of work. So I'm excited to talk about this area or this domain of ministry called literacy or education. So I don't really have experience in this at all, but thankfully, Rachel and I were both able to attend last year a course called Arts in Literacy and Materials Development. I believe it was an online course that was offered through Payap University in Thailand, and it was an online course, and it's more of a workshop, I would say, because the point of it is teams are coming together to create materials for their curriculum, their schools, their different projects that they're working on. And they were gracious enough to allow us to come in and observe how they do this. So it was nice to be able to see it from start to finish and understand more about this particular domain. And so that's why we are both here sharing about it. We don't come with like a literacy or education training background, but you've had some experience getting to support some literacy projects, is that right?
Some experience in the recent months, and most of what I've learned, I don't have any formal training either, and most of what I've learned is from hanging around specialists that we have on our team and just listening to them describe the processes and things that go into developing literacy in minority communities. So
Hmm.
all informal, on the job kind of training.
Right. I think it's nice if like you are working in that domain, you have that kind of training, and I'm grateful that there are trainings available for people in literacy and education that include the arts. And coming from like our training background is all of general ethno arts principles and how it could be applied in a lot of different domains. So it was really great to get to experience this course. Um, so maybe we could start with just introducing this topic and why local language, local cultural materials are important.
Yeah, so when we come into these cultures and try to help them develop literacy programs, we're not just coming in cold. There's a whole worldview, there's a whole perception of how education happens, and we can't separate language out of all of that. So we can't just import materials any way we like and just kind of copy paste it. So this is what the course taught us is how to develop these materials in a way that's culturally appropriate for wherever we're working, in a way that respects their culture and in a way that empowers them, especially the younger generation, to understand where they came from and their historical context.
So we've talked in the past about visual arts and this thing called visual literacy, where just like in literacy of a language and words, or trying to have words, certain string of letters are representing sounds that form words, that form sentences, and help people to read. That there are also the visual aspect of literacy, and we talk about how arts are not universal, and so that things related to symbols and colors and patterns and all of these things do not communicate across different cultures. And so particularly, just like we talked about, bringing in outside forms for worship or for communicating scripture, that we want to be able to do that in ways that aren't foreign to them and that aren't outside of their culture. And I say we want to encourage them to be able to have access to these kinds of things and be able to create these things for themselves. And so the same thing would apply in this domain when there's a lot of different. There are materials certainly that could be imported or translated from the outside that include artistic elements that may not be able or may not be as helpful or could be confusing. It
Mm-hmm.
could be a barrier to their learning. One example I heard in an Asian context, I can't remember if they shared it at
I
this
remember it,
training or
but they
not.
talked about it in the course.
So, okay, so and it was materials that were translated from the outside, but they left all the original illustrations in, and it was some. The picture was, I can't remember what the lesson was about, but regardless, there was a mailbox like we would see in America outside at the edge of the property, up on a stick, and the child thought that this was a spirit house because in their context, at the edge of their property is something similar up on a platform, and it's used for a different purpose, and even the house itself looked different, and they thought it was, I can't remember what it was. They thought it was some other
Spirit House.
building. They thought the mailbox was a spirit house, and then the house itself looked like some
Oh,
Western house. I can't remember like how it was drawn or illustrated. It just didn't communicate, and so it was just a barrier to their learning. And so this domain, not just about literacy and how to read, but just in education in general, has a lot of applications as well. Particularly those working in like multilingual education and working with projects that are doing education for minority language groups, who who will go to school in a language that's not their own, whatever the language of wider communication is. Could you share just a bit about this area of multilingual education from what you understand, and just the importance of, or the benefits of starting in their language and their culture and being able to transition
Mhm.
to the language of wider communication?
Yeah, so from what I've learned from my colleagues, it's not just that they're coming into a majority culture where their home cultures are not really incorporated. It's also that there's multiple languages going on in the educational system. And what I've learned is that the concept of assigning sounds to letters, the brain actually only learns it once, like a true learning, and um, every subsequent time they learn a new reading system, the brain just sees it as another sort of example, but the brain doesn't learn it again every time. And so that's just another thing that we need to consider when we're developing materials for them, because when they come into school already learning the concept of reading in their mother tongue, then anything that they learn subsequent to that linguistically is going to be much easier for them if they're able to have that learning experience the first time in their own language. And so it's another area where we need to be thinking about development of materials to help them get off on the right foot. Otherwise, they get up to maybe fourth grade or something before they're actually learning in the language that is being taught. If we don't do this first step, then they actually go into school not speaking the language that they're learning in. So you can imagine how hard that is to catch up under those conditions.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And there are organizations out there that specialize in multilingual education and helping programs to develop, starting with their language and culture first, and then helping them to transition and having more success in school later. And then just thinking of education, there are a lot of different styles of learning, styles of teaching, and some of those could be culturally unique or specific. And I know in my upbringing, we learned through song and motions, and there was dramatic elements, and we're having to maybe we're using like crafts and colors and different things like that. And so there's all of this like artistic elements just to learning in general, that where there's potential to incorporate local expressions into that, using materials, using forms that are meaningful and familiar to help
Now
them
that
to
I'm thinking
engage
about
it.
it, I thought of an idea now while you were talking. I mean, an
Mm-hmm.
example. Now that I'm thinking about it, my mom's a teacher, and she loved for us to learn very much hands-on. And so I remember as a kid, we would try to go to as many factories as we could to watch the production line and learn how things were made that way. And I remember one time we went to this bread making factory early in the morning, and I got to see the whole production line from start to finish. And then they let us taste the bread at the end. And then after that, the companies wouldn't, because they were afraid about, what's the word when they're afraid they're going to be sued, liable,
Mm-hmm.
liability. After that, companies started not allowing outside people to come in to observe the process because of liability issues. Um, but that's a memory that sticks in my head to this day, about how fun learning can be, and how that's kind of a artistic way in the West for kids to learn. We have all of our traditional things that we think of, like arts and crafts in class and things like that. But yeah, I don't hear a lot of times about people going to factories to watch production lines. Or I remember one time we went for my birthday to make chocolate pralines as an adult. And so I got to learn about that process that way. And yeah, so coming from a very different background than a lot of these places where we work, where the right answer is the only thing that matters in the process, or how fun it is, or any of that is much less important.
Absolutely. That's yeah, super interesting. There's uh, I think I remember getting to go on trips to like an ice cream factory or
Yeah.
just anything where you get to like the more hands-on, somewhat hands-on approach where you get to see things. That's really fun. I want to transition us into the story for today, which comes from an article that was posted on SIL.org, their blog. This is from an organization called SIL International, and one of their teams from, where were they from? The Solomon Islands.
Mhm.
They were part of this training that we went to, and so they wrote an article about their experience. And so just wanted to give a little bit of a just picture of kind of what happened and someone's experience from that. So I will post a link to this so you can see it and read it for yourself, and I'll read through some of it, maybe paraphrase some, and we'll just talk about it some more. The article was by Martha Madsky, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who's an SIL literacy specialist. And so here's the start of that article. It starts with a quote from Todd Sourman, an EthnoArts, SIL EthnoArts consultant. He says, "If it's true that a picture is worth 1,000 words, then the pictures need to be related to a community's world and life experiences." How much more is this relevant to children's education as they learn not only in their own language but also in culturally relevant ways? Using arts in the classroom is one way of passing along cultural traditions and values so they don't get lost in this ever-changing world. And so to address the challenge of incorporating arts in education, there were more than 50 people from 15 countries that attended this 3-week online course called Arts in Literacy and Education Material Development. The purpose of the course was to train teachers to develop learning materials based on the local language and culture where they work. Each participant made a cultural calendar to show things like the seasons, winds, agricultural and fishing activities, festivals and celebrations for their home culture, and they used it to plan weekly themes for the school year. So just starting out exploring what all their culture has, what are their traditions, and what are their different resources. So the idea was to discover these things, which would include local art forms like crafts, music, poetry, stories, agricultural traditions, and then each participant chose one theme around which to create learning materials for the students while taking care to create materials that are appropriate, not just to the cultural context, but also considering the students' learning level. So I think there were some groups there that were doing maybe like older, maybe teen groups, and doing other materials that were more like elementary education. So a good variety. So we have to consider that. There were 2 Solomon Islander attendees, along with Martha, the author of this blog article. Margaret was one of these ladies who's a principal education officer for the multilingual education at the Ministry of Education and Human Resources in the Solomon Islands. She said, "The training helped me to understand how to better develop culturally appropriate materials using the existing local art forms, as well as developing new ones." She chose the Arosi word ogu, which means sea worm, for her theme. So I guess sea worm is an important part of their culture. She created a big book, a small reading book, a busy picture, a listening story, sequence pictures, a song, and a poem, all in Arosi language. And the materials were developed to help grade 3 students learn more about sea worms and the place that they play in Arosi culture. So that was a lot of materials and art forms developed just on this topic. And I thought that was pretty interesting. They could come up with so much around around this. For me, sea worms doesn't hold any meaning, but it's just such a big part of their
Yeah.
culture. I guess it's very familiar.
Yeah.
So the other Solomon Islander, Karina, a lecturer in early childhood education at Solomon Islands National University, chose Ruku, which means rain in Rovenia, as her theme. She looked carefully at a traditional Rovenia song to discover the patterns and style of the song. Then she wrote a new song about Ruku, rain, following the same pattern. So the result is a lovely new song to teach Rovenia children and the sounds and feelings of rain in their own culture. When asked how this training might help students studying early childhood education at the university, Karina said, it will help them to discover and decide on relevant existing art forms to produce for their community early childhood education programs, and also to create new materials to use in enhancing foundational learning. The course also looked at various theories of education and how to apply those theories to generating materials in order to help the students develop and grow in higher levels of learning. And we'll try to talk about some of those in a little bit. Martha Matsky said of the course, it's exciting to think about how this type of training might be used here in the Solomons to help teachers learn to make learning materials that are based on the local language and culture of the children. There are ways to create materials in the local language and culture that can align with the national curriculum. We hope that there will be an opportunity to provide this important training in the Solomon Islands, she said. So that's our article and story for today. What thoughts came up for you, Rachel, as you read this and as we're thinking about this topic?
Yeah, I think as ethnoarts specialists, it would be good for us to think about the different kinds of contexts where people work, and what developing those materials the way that we were taught would look like in those specific contexts, because not every culture situation where we work, there's such a big difference between the majority culture and the minority cultures, where you can really see, just even as a tourist or something off the street, that you can see it's a different community. So if I thought about my context and trying to develop, all these materials as we learned based off of one word, I'm not sure how that would go really. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. I just think that it would be good to think about kind of troubleshooting and ways to help ethnoart specialists to still be able to develop these materials, um, but in a more fitting way for these other contexts. Because where the facilitators of the course work still, I think, that's a super distinct culture and super vibrant and alive, and they're very excited about their community and their history and their culture, and it's not difficult, but that's not the case for everyone. So it's
Mm,
important to think about that, I think.
definitely.
I think also
Yeah.
the educational models that are going on specifically in those places, like where I am, the getting the answer right is very important, and you're not allowed to write in books. So
Mm-hmm.
if I think about, like, I was thinking recently about what if I made a connect the dots for the kids, a book just with connect the dots, for new words that they might not know. And then the word would be written under the connects the dots, and the dots diagram would be the picture of whatever it was. Well, you would have to develop two separate products. One would be the picture, like the book, and then the other one would be where you would actually be able to write, because you're not supposed to write in the textbook.
Hmm.
So simple things like that for kids to be able to interact with materials in a way that's not inhibiting. Yeah, it requires some thought.
Certainly. That's I would never think about that. I'm like, of course, just write in the book. That's what
Yeah.
that's what we want to do. Or I think to some like educational models that I learned about when living in Eastern Europe, and just how it's just very rote memory, and just learn the facts, listen to the teacher, and be able to repeat, on a test or something. And I think one thing that struck me in this course was learning the different ways of learning, or the trying to encourage new models of teaching or learning that would encourage like critical thinking, that would encourage engagement and participation in a lesson rather than just like listening, receiving. So things like learning a song, learning a dance or movement related to a lesson. And so that there's just, I just have great appreciation for people in education, because there's, you can try to generalize it into a, this culture leans more towards learning this way, or tends to be this way. But even in growing up in my own culture, within one classroom, we had different learning styles for
Yeah.
individuals, and different preferences. And so this is a really complex issue, and there's a lot to be considered. And so I feel like the course like was teaching them like teams a process of exploring arts, and creating materials, evaluating culture, and trying to come up with things that would be relevant to their specific context. And I realized that not everybody is thinking that broadly of their context. They're thinking of just grade 3 in this school. Maybe it's just one classroom. Maybe it's multiple classrooms, but they do have a smaller audience size that they're thinking of, trying to be specific. But they're drawing from more general cultural things that a majority of people would be familiar with. So things like the rain, everybody knows about the rain, or what was it, the sea worms. I guess that's something that would be familiar enough that you could draw from. So it is complex,
I
and
think there was one also with a machete. I don't remember if it was
oh,
Vanuatu or what, but there was one also who did her materials on all around the machete.
and like it's different uses that they have in there.
Different uses, and I remember one I don't remember what it was, but it was like a series of pictures, I think. And there were banana leaves, and we had to put them in the right order. That was the activity.
Mm,
And I don't
mm-hmm,
remember so much what the story was about, but it was something that any kid there would know exactly what it was about. And there was rain too, and the banana leaf would protect you from the rain, but you couldn't get
mm-hmm.
the leaf if you didn't have the machete to cut the leaves and so on. And so it's a real like important part of their culture. And everyone, I think there was also a school in the set of pictures, and even the kids. I'm messing it up. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, they start very young with the machete.
Not something I would want to give to my children for sure. But
A machete.
yeah, but that's great. I'm sure they are all taught how to use it, and because they start so young, they know
Yep,
how to
very
make the most
comfortable
of
with
it.
it.
And so let's talk about some of these theories of learning and education,
Mhm.
particularly this one called Bloom's taxonomy. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, that was one that really stuck out to me from the course because I remember before I took the training, I would get in these situations where I was in a workshop and I would try to have the participants think critically, kind of more outside the box, a bit more creatively. And I would always run into this wall, and I just couldn't understand what it was about. And then we got to this point in the course where they taught us about these six stages in Bloom's taxonomy and how, and this is just from Wikipedia, they use an example with apples there. So it starts from knowledge where you just, like you can name different types of apples. And then the next one is comprehension, where you can organize them in a certain way, like, golden and pink lady or something like that. And then the third one is application, where you can talk about for example, nutritional information of a particular apple and how it can prevent disease. And a lot of these cultures where we work, they don't get much into step three, the stage three, maybe a little bit, but it's really about knowledge and comprehension. Um, and then the last three stages of the theory are analysis, where uh, you're not just looking at different kinds of apples, you're looking at various, for example, dishes, maybe, and how the preparation of those dishes affects the nutritional benefits of the apple and what that would mean for the human consuming them. And then synthesis, which is putting the parts together in a new way. So if we're continuing with the Wikipedia example, it would be, for example, inventing a healthier version of, say, like an apple dessert or something. And then the last one is evaluation, which is just looking back on all of it and being able to objectively evaluate yourself on a set of criteria that you set for yourself. And so it was just a really eye-opening experience for me because of these last three stages that a lot of these schools don't go into, like you were talking about with, the teacher is the expert and you're just supposed to memorize. And I remember at the times that I've had to learn a language, I've used GPA a lot, and using the pictures to get vocabulary in fast was really a game changer for me. And if I had to memorize it from a book, I wouldn't remember it probably anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
those sets of vocabulary I could get in my head very quickly. And so it's an example of kind of an outside the box, more experiential way of learning. And so, yeah, it's going to be really helpful for me in the future when I get in these situations again of like trying to do, a DBS or something, and having people think more critically or objectively or things like that, or being able to put new pieces of information together, like in synthesis. It just explains a lot more about who I'm working with. And so gives me compassion for them and the ability to understand where they're coming from so that I can meet them in a better way.
Mm-hmm. That's great, and it applies in so many different areas. I'm thinking about when we do our EthnoArts trainings or workshops, we can incorporate some of these
Mm-hmm.
theories into how we teach. Um, this is very like student centered, trying to really get them engaged in the process. And I mean, the teacher is still leading and facilitating that process, but being able to involve them in the process of thinking outside the box. And it is a stretch for sure, and I certainly can see more benefit. I see this in other training models that are more like they are, what's the word, adult learning models, and having this kind of like opportunities for reflection and
Mm-hmm.
feedback, debriefing experiences, and all of that can be done much younger. So there's a lot of applications here to that, and I imagine that being able to incorporate local cultural elements and forums allows them to join in these materials where it's not as big of a stretch in this process. Join in the process of learning and engaging and
And I think
thinking and imagining.
some of what they told us in the course was about how culture being a familiar starting point, like the materials are so different from what they're used to, but the culture is familiar by contrast. And so it's an easier stretch for them to get used to thinking in those new ways, but using something familiar, like a culture that they would have seen or heard, even if they don't know the particular way of using that tool or something like that. They'll
Mm-hmm.
have seen it still around them, and so it's not completely new. So they feel safer to explore learning in these new ways.
One thing I wanted to point out that stood out to me was the busy pictures and how
Mm-hmm.
that was used as a springboard for a lot of different kinds of activities. And if we're going to include a link to this article, and you'll see some pictures in the article, and we'll try to share some on social media as well. So you can kind of see what we're talking about. But if you can just imagine a scene, and it's like an outdoor scene, and in this picture you have like mountains that are far away. Maybe you've got farmland. Maybe there's a river running through.
It's kind
There's
of like
different.
Where's Waldo? Maybe that's a good image for people.
Yeah, yeah. If you grew up in America, and I assume that's American, maybe in other Western
They
countries,
have their own
but
versions everywhere. I've seen it here.
okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's there are a lot of people about. Maybe there's farmers in the fields. Maybe there's children swimming. There's people fishing. You've got buildings that might be home, or maybe it's some gathering place. You've got markets happening. All of these things in one picture, and it just captures so much in the context of this culture of all these familiar things. Maybe there is rain happening over one place. Maybe the sea worms are coming out of the sea. I don't know, something like that, where you can comment on so many things about the culture, a lot of themes, a lot of familiar topics, and you can use that as a springboard into other lessons. So anyway, I just think it's interesting to point out, particularly people in visual arts, and might enjoy how that looks and how that works, and yeah. So there's a lot more that we could talk about. I think it's enough to introduce the topic, and we want to link you also in our show notes to an email address where you could write to ask about this arts and literacy course and how and when it's happening. I'll also include a link to the PIAP University site where they have this training. It's kind of it's a department under the university called the Linguistics Institute, and you'll go to that website. You can click on training. There's a page for literacy. I didn't see anything listed about like the next arts and literacy course happening there, but it's just, you can see a lot about literacy training there. There's also an EthnoArts tab with that. The last one was a training from last year, so there'll be things posted there for training opportunities as well. Anyway, so just want to make listeners aware that we'll link you to that. The PIAP University also offers Masters in Linguistics, and they have a new track under this degree that's focused on language development, which includes literacy courses as well as EthnoArts course. So that's really cool. That's being offered now at the MA level. So just want to make you aware of that. Is there anything else that we should mention, Rachel, that you can think of?
You can take the course. I mean, they let us take the course without developing materials. So if you want to just kind of audit and learn how they describe the materials and kind of familiarize yourself with the process, you shouldn't feel pressured to have to develop materials. They're very happy to let you just audit. So if that would be a deal breaker for you, then don't let it be a deal breaker because it's not.
Sure. That's something you can ask when you write to the artsandliteracy@gmail.com address. But if you are in a literacy project or education and want to be involved in something like this, there were whole teams and departments that were coming to this. People from Ministry of Education, people that were teachers at a school.
It's a
And
real
so
gold mine. Yeah.
yeah, so that there are opportunities to create a lot of materials around one theme, and you get equipped with the process then that you can then take on and develop materials for like the rest of the year with
I
that.
think
So
that's
yeah,
their
that's
goal, one of their goals. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So great opportunity if you're involved in that kind of work. And again, Rachel and I are just on the outside. We're observers. We don't have a ton of experience in this field, but we would love to invite you to share any of your experiences in the domain of literacy, education, how you've seen arts play a part in that. If you've got stories, please send those in to us and share it. We would love to pass that on and continue to have this conversation about this domain and share what's going on in the world and give other people inspiration and ideas. So with that, I'll say thank you to Rachel. Thanks for joining the Arts and Literacy course with me, and thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Well, thank you again. Please do reach out. Please do share the podcast with your friends, leave reviews and that sort of thing. Help spread the word about what's going on. And we just encourage you to go and spark some creativity wherever you are. So thanks, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. We would love to hear what you thought.
What resonated with you today? What questions did this raise? Anything you'd like to learn more about? Maybe you have stories you'd like to share.
Please feel free to contact us at ethnoartspod@gmail.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at ethnoartspod.
We also invite you to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on. This will help others to find out about the show. Please feel free to share the podcast with others.
We look forward to sharing more with you next time on Sparking Creativity, the EthnoArts podcast.